Live. Okay, so we'll get a few attendees ticking through and joining us here today. We got a few jumping in, so I'll just give it a few minutes while a few more attendees join us. I can see Timea has come on board. So Timea, we'll come to you just after our brief presentation. I can see a few more people jumping in as well, so that's wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to kick off, and as we go along, I'm sure more people will come into the session as well. So we'll kick off to make sure we start on time and give everybody enough time today. So welcome, everyone. If you've just joined from our previous session, then thank you for joining us again. If you've just logged in now for the first time, then thank you for making time to be here with us today. And do make sure you watch that first session once the recording becomes available. So here's what to expect for the next hour. We have a special presentation from Canada on the importance of work-integrated learning, and that's going to be followed by a special Q&A with two additional speakers joining us from Kenya and from Hungary. And for those of you who are listening out there, we do want you to get involved as well. So go ahead and use that chat box to say hello to your fellow participants, share something with the group, type in your questions there. We also have a Q&A section where you can type in questions there. If you need any help, that's how you can reach us. And I can also pass those questions on to our panelists. So we're here today to talk about work, our favorite thing, but work certainly has felt very different for most of us this year. And as we're all adapting to new systems, new processes, new tools, communication styles, the world of work as we know it has changed. So what might this mean for students who are just getting started in their professional career? As we've all learned this year, certainly soft skills can be a key to success, such as being able to adapt to change and to feel empathy for others and what they might be going through. So clearly, the sooner that students can experience the realities of work, the better. So we're going to talk about the benefits of work-integrated learning for students, but also for sending nations, and how gaining work experience abroad can provide direct benefits to the future economic needs of a student's origin country. And our session today will also explore how providers can tackle skills shortages in labor markets by creating new programs or collaborating with new partners on new initiatives. So I'd like to turn the floor over now to our two guest speakers. We have Chelsea Ljutic from Canada, of course, the Trade Commissioner for the High Commission of Canada, and Andrew Champagne, the Manager of Mobility Programs at Colleges and Institutes Canada. Chelsea, we'll begin with you. Please, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Just going to share my screen here. And I realized I actually only put my email and Andrew's email on those that first slide. So please do take note of that if you do wish to get in contact with either of us after the presentation or after the BMI event. So as Jackie mentioned, we're going to be talking a bit about work-integrated learning. I'm going to start us off with a bit of a presentation just about the key benefits of work-integrated learning in the current climate. And then I'm going to pass it on to Andrew Champagne from Colleges and Institutes. And I think he'll be talking a little bit more about the kind of USP of colleges and institutes and what they can offer students from abroad. One thing I do have to do, though, is a small disclaimer, just as we are in the time of COVID and because I do work for the Government of Canada. So please just note that the information in this presentation may change. Due to COVID-19, there's currently travel restrictions in place. So just make sure you and your students are all consulting relevant websites regarding that. So the first slide I want to talk about is just this idea of kind of how we're moving into a new economic system, human economies. And I want to start by mentioning a recent position paper, which was put out by the OECD. It was called The Future of Education and Skills, Education 2030. And it noted that we're really facing unprecedented social, economic, and environmental challenges right now worldwide. And this is in particular driven by accelerated globalization, but also by a faster rate of technological development. And I think that faster rate of technological development is perhaps a bit of an understatement. advancement in tech is moving just so fast right now that our era at the moment is being referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. So things like 3D printing, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, 5G, robotics, we're moving just so swiftly right now into this world of smart technology than we ever sort of have before. Full disclosure, I'm not an expert in STEM. I'm actually a teacher by trade, but I want to speak to you today about why I feel more than ever those of us working in education, and particularly in higher education, will need to be just so keenly aware of how these rapid technology changes are going to affect the future of education and its responsibility and delivery to young people. So I think perhaps we're at one of history's sort of great turning points in human development. According to the World Economic Forum, 65% of today's school children are going to be graduating into jobs that don't yet exist. I'm just going to let that stat sit with you for a minute. And also on top of that, 50% of jobs could be disrupted by AI and automation in the next 10 to 20 years. Higher education is going to be responsible for preparing young people for jobs that aren't yet created, for technologies that have yet to be invented, but also to solve problems that have not yet been anticipated. In effect, education is going to have to adapt very, very quickly to preparing young people for changing labor market needs and economies. And I want to talk about these economies for a moment, bringing it back to the idea of human economies. So economies have traditionally been labeled based on the work that people do within them, whereas historic agrarian and industrial economies capitalized on physical labor. The knowledge economy drew workers from fields and factories into offices and instead started to capitalize on their brains. But experts are now indicated we're witnessing sort of a gradual shift towards what's being described as this human economy, where the priority is going to be on the valuing and hiring based on human hearts or based on humanity. That is to say that the pure intellect and the kind of analytical skills that once made workers indispensable in the knowledge economy are no longer going to provide an advantage, especially over the quick development of machines. So instead, and as Jackie mentioned, soft skills, things like creativity, critical thinking, passion, teamwork, communication, basically that is which makes us human. That's what's going to be valued, and that's what's going to allow young people and workers really to remain competitive. In a recent Harvard Business Review study of over 1,000 CEOs, candidates that were labeled collaborative, communicative, creative, and flexible were actually shown in the study to have been hired in priority. And what this is telling us is that to some extent, the businesses and economies that succeed in future will be those that capitalize on that which only humans are able to offer, i.e. what they can offer above machines. And while employers are likely to increasingly want candidates with higher levels of emotional intelligence, resilience, and empathy, these are not generally attributes we associate with traditional academia. And certainly they're not traits that have historically been nurtured or used in the selection for admissions to academia. So what will that mean then for modern academic institutions? Well, machines are getting smarter, and they're getting faster, and they're getting cheaper. And I think that there's often a misconception that this means students are going to have to be studying towards robot-proof jobs. But actually the likelihood is that all jobs will in some way be affected by this kind of rapid change in technology and machines. And I think as they become increasingly capable, machines will be able to take on more and more tasks that are performed by humans. So as we know throughout history, machines have replaced particularly human labor as technology has evolved, but probably for the first time ever, they're moving beyond that physical space and into the cognitive space. In other words, no longer will automation simply just replace low-skill labor. It's also increasingly going to put cognitive jobs, those office jobs, at risk as well. And importantly, as job functions evolve, skill sets are going to be relevant for shorter and shorter periods of time. So therefore, the increase in AI and automation is probably going to go hand in hand with the ongoing need for things like upskilling, reskilling, just to move humans up that value chain. And I think it's also worth mentioning very briefly here that COVID-19, as we all know, has caused one of the greatest modern disruptions to international education that we've seen in recent history. And according to experts, institutions are likely to see a decrease in enrollment for programs linked to lower employment prospects, mainly because students are graduating in the next few years, and they're graduating into economies of uncertainty. So with the impact of COVID-19, we could also therefore see accelerated trends in higher education that may have otherwise taken years to manifest. So things like, again, increased need for upskilling and reskilling, but also flexible pathways to earning credentials for students. And I think that this could see changes to the future evaluation as well of higher education institutions. I heard Jonah mention it briefly in the last presentation, in his presentation, but potentially, you know, higher education institutions are no longer going to be ranked based on simply their prestigiousness or their academic and research output, but more so on things like their excellence of online teaching, international collaboration, innovation, but especially on things like industry connection. So on to then talking about the case for work integrated learning. And I think the argument here is not that students should stop studying or should start preparing for end times, but rather that students are going to need to change their approach rather to learning. Modern students are probably either going to need to seek to master tasks and skills that assist them in developing and delivering capable systems, so such as through STEM expertise, critical thinking, problem solving, or they're going to need to develop the skills that are necessary for jobs that kind of connect us in our humanity and therefore can't be replaced by machines. And this is particularly relevant in the care economy. So jobs like teaching and nursing, jobs again that cannot be replaced by machines because of the reliance on emotional intelligence, empathy, that sort of thing. Most importantly, though, institutions are going to need to quickly respond to this new demand by aligning themselves to market needs, labor market needs. I think a fluctuating skills market means that employees' skills are going to be outdated more rapidly, and then require ongoing training, development, which will require, again, investment into things like upskilling and reskilling. I saw a recent Pew Research Center survey that suggested that 87% of modern workers actually think it's going to be essential to get some form of training and develop new job skills at some point throughout their career. So even workers are thinking about this and about this need to kind of constantly be improving on their skills. But bringing it back to students and institutions, the students of today and tomorrow are really going to need to enthusiastically embrace lifelong learning, as the impact of frequent technological change will shorten the shelf life of their skills. And to assist them, institutions will likely need to emphasize soft skills, practical learning throughout all their curriculum delivery, which could very well only happen with a significant pedagogical U-turn, although I have seen a number of institutions starting to sort of take that approach, especially during COVID. And in addition, I think that while investment in R&D and scientific publications are extremely important for developing innovation, they might not be enough anymore. They might not be enough in the future, particularly in this new era of COVID-19. I think for institutions to remain relevant, they're going to have to keep justifying themselves and demonstrating their value and contribution to society. So I think one way this can be done is by leveraging strategic links with industry partners. A good example is providing students with work integrated learning experiences, as these have been shown to help students develop soft skills, but also helping them foster those practical industry-specific knowledge skills to complement the theoretical learning that they've received during their education. So work integrated learning, which shouldn't be confused with experiential learning, is primarily based on kind of linking the theory and the practice together to deliver experiences for students that are directly integrated into their academic education. They bridge that theory and practice, they bring them more holistic learning experiences, and it's generally including things like apprenticeships, field placements, practicums, co-ops, internships, and applied research. And through these experiences, obviously, students are going to be getting real world experience, which acknowledges really that the true value of education brings together that knowledge of industry with the theoretical knowledge that students have already developed. And it also brings institutions and industry so much closer together. So I'm going to just very briefly talk about Canada as a kind of a case study before I pass it on to Andrew. And for students studying in Canada, and one of the reasons I feel really grateful that I get to be able to present about Canada today is that Canada really does offer international students a truly unique approach to work integrated learning. For students studying in Canada, especially international students, it's one of our unique selling points. It's typically one of the reasons students come to Canada from international destinations. And for international students in Canada, they're going to be eligible to work on or off campus, throughout their degree. This includes full-time on their holidays. So we're already encouraging that work culture, but it also means that for the work integrated learning, so if they choose to do a work integrated learning placement in Canada, it's not going to actually involve adding any time onto their degree. It's built right into that program. So they're not penalized for wanting to gain some of that work experience to make them more competitive when they graduate. The other great benefit too is that for most students, it's not true of every opportunity, but for many opportunities, students will actually be paid for this experience, which is, again, another reason Canada is often set apart from other destinations. So let's just look for a minute at some of these options in Canada. One option that's honestly truly unique is the co-op option. This is something that was first developed in the USA, but Canada has since become a world leader in the idea of delivering co-op education, so much so that if you ask a Canadian higher educational professional what sets us apart, they will often bring up the co-op. And the co-op is essentially, usually again, a paid, subject-relevant work experience that's built right into the student's program. So in other words, it's integrated. Students, again, are not penalized for taking a co-op. They don't have to compensate for lost time that they haven't spent studying. And I guess the belief there for Canadians anyway is that that practical work experience is just as important as what they're learning at university, college, wherever they choose to study. So for example, I've heard of students studying art history who's done 1 day a week in an art gallery. Again, it was paid. I heard of another student who was studying finance and economics, and he did a placement at PwC. This made these students very competitive when they graduated, and it's not only necessarily domestic placements. You know, lots of Canadian institutions have international partnerships so that students could actually be completing their work experience placement abroad as well. Our institutions in Canada really do prioritize building and maintaining those extensive industry partnerships too. I have a feeling Andrew could very well touch on that after my presentation, so I won't draw on it too much. But that is something that's very, very important to our institutions, kind of building those industry partnerships. And there are lots of opportunities closer to home. So if students don't want to sort of go abroad, or they don't want to go off into their local communities, a number of institutions have actually started to develop opportunities on campus. And this includes accelerators and incubators to help students essentially develop ideas, gather seed funding, and even begin a startup before graduating from an undergraduate degree. In addition, Canadian institutions offer other forms of work integrated learning, things like applied research, for example. A student could be paid to collaborate with academics to produce unique research, some of which may be even published, which is pretty rare for an undergraduate student. And it's worth mentioning here that Canada really is a world leader in research and development. We're only home to 0.5% of the world's population, but we produce 2.8% of the world's scientific research. So we do take research very seriously. We've got the infrastructure to support it. And one good example of that, which I like to refer to, is our supercluster culture in Canada. So in 2018, the Canadian government announced a $950 million investment with match funding from the private sector into these 5 superclusters in Canada, which are hubs of innovation. They bring together academic and research institutions, not-for-profit organizations, and medium to large businesses to generate new ideas, job-creating ecosystems, a bit like Silicon Valley. And there's lots of opportunities for students to get involved in these as well, whether through their placements, their work integrated learning, or when they graduate. So opportunities such as these really give students a chance to move beyond the academic learning, to apply, to test their skills in real workplace settings. And in fact, many programs that exist actually do design their programs in collaboration with potential employers, with those industry connections, so that they're ensuring that they're offering opportunities to students that will really translate into postgraduate potential employment. Finally, worth mentioning, Canada does offer a very generous post-graduation work permit option, so that depending on the length of the initial program, students that finish in Canada, including international students, could stay in Canada for up to 3 years. This is really one of the more competitive post-graduation permit programs of kind of the English-speaking Western countries. And it's really because in Canada, we do recognize the importance of our international students to our economy, to our institutions, to our communities. So we want them to continue building and developing those skills. These work integrated learning opportunities really do translate into real job opportunities for students. And it's worth mentioning here that Canada has the strongest fiscal position in the G7, and among some of the best fiscal prospects in the G7 and the G20. It's also one of the most financially stable countries worldwide, and it was the only G7 country to avoid financial crisis in 2008. And in light of the current global health crisis as well, Canada recently ranked second most financially resilient in the world on the SRI Macroeconomic Resilience Index. So in other words, in Canada, we do have the infrastructure to be able to support future international students as they integrate into our economy. Some of our institutions actually boast graduate employability rates that are very, very high, sometimes upwards of 85 or 90%. And we do have 4 Canadian institutions in the top 100 and 8 in the top 200 of the QS graduate employability rankings in 2020. And finally, we're one of the OECD's top investors into higher education, which according to them is a key indicator of the future returns on economic growth. So I think for these reasons and many more, investing in sending international students to Canada can really translate into a real return on investment for scholarship organizations, but also for students, returning to their home countries in particular. Canadian credentials are highly valued, they're internationally recognized, we have exceptional quality of education in Canada, and that work integrated learning opportunity is really truly what does set us apart. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I've put some resources up on the screen. But I do encourage you, if you are a scholarship organization, to meet with some of our institutions that are here to find out more about our work integrated learning opportunities. Ooh, apologies. And yeah, I'll leave it there and pass on to Andrew, I guess. But I will be here for the Q&A as well, if you do have further questions about work integrated learning opportunities and the Canadian context. Thanks so much for all your time.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. Andrew, I think over to you. You can take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Chelsea. That was a wonderful, wonderful overview. And just give me a second here while I get my presentation queued up. Excellent. All right. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Andrew Champagne, Manager of Mobility Programs with Colleges and Institutes Canada. So I'm just going to build off a little bit of what Chelsea said and elaborate more specifically on how work integrated learning is a key component of the educational experience that a student would get while attending a college or institute in Canada. So first of all, just a very quick overview. Colleges and Institutes Canada, we are a national membership-driven organization representing publicly supported colleges, institutes, polytechnics, cégeps, etc., all across Canada. There are many different names for technical and vocational institutions in Canada, but they all have some very common traits, common characteristics, and work integrated learning certainly is one of them. You'll see this map here just represents the scope, the scale of where our member institutions are located. We currently represent over 130 institutions in rural, remote, urban locations all across Canada, offering education in both English and or French. What's really remarkable here is that the college system was really developed roughly 50 years ago, and one of its key principles was to be accessible. These were institutions that were largely driven by community needs. They have, of course, expanded to take on a much larger view of community, both locally and globally. But roughly 95% of Canada's population lives within 50 kilometers of a Colleges and Institutes Canada member institution. So there are lots of opportunities regardless of where you want to study, whether that might be in Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, some of the larger cities, or some smaller locations. What's really important to note here, and I'm going to talk about it on this slide, is depending on the types of programs that students might be interested in studying, there will be differences in terms of what is offered and where. And it'll make sense as we go through the presentation. And this is largely because, again, institutions are meant to serve the sort of the local labor market needs. And so programs that are heavily involved in developing skills for the extractive industries, for example, will more likely be available at colleges and institutes where those industries are prominently featured. Colleges and Institutes Canada, in fact, represent the fastest growing study level for international students in Canada. Just some quick stats here to show that approximately 50% of all international students studying at the post-secondary level in Canada are doing so at a college or institute. Over the years, we've noticed that international student demand has really been driven increasingly by that return on investment and post-graduation work opportunities. Not only does Canada offer some really interesting opportunities in terms of the postgraduate work permit, but you have colleges and institutes that are really designing programs to help students transition into the labor market, largely based on the skills, the competencies that they are acquiring as a result of a very consultative approach to make sure that programs are integrating the needs of employers. So as you see here, roughly 50% of the students at the post-secondary level are studying at a college or institute. The vast majority of these students will stay for a certain period of time, take advantage of those post-graduation work opportunities, but most of them will ultimately go back to their home country. They bring with them those skills and tend to do quite well considering the overall sort of reputation of a Canadian credential. But some of the reasons why we've seen increasing demand for from international students in particular is that, again, colleges and institutes are delivering experiential and work integrated learning opportunities. This is really a core element of virtually all programs that are offered by colleges and institutes. And as Chelsea mentioned, this approach to learning really enables graduates to transition to the workforce quickly and successfully. So colleges and institutes in Canada are not sort of measured based on the number of academic research papers or publications that they will put out. You won't find colleges and institutes among sort of the globally ranked institutions. And, you know, part of that is because they are very much measured on the employability, the employment outcomes of their graduates. Generally speaking, the types of programs that are offered at one college or another tend to be quite similar in that they are meeting the specific demands of that industry. What might be a little bit different perhaps is the location, the other types of services that college might be able to offer. But in general, we don't have rankings for colleges and institutes in Canada. It's the employment outcomes that really speak volumes. Colleges and institutes ensure that students have good employment outcomes partly by working very closely with local experts and employers. So a part of the process here really revolves around what we call a program advisory committee. And this is quite a unique approach to developing curriculum where for virtually every program, there is input from local industry representatives, and they are effectively telling the college, you know, this is what your students need to know in order for them to be effective employees, for us to be able to hire them, and for them to do their job well. So there's sort of this feedback loop in the sense that you know, employers can be reasonably sure that the graduates that are coming out of those institutions are going to be employable and ready to work. And institutions can, you know, improve their outcomes, you know, the outcomes of their students by working closely with those employers. So this is a really important element of the overall experience. And again, to contributing towards those labor market outcomes. As Chelsea mentioned, research is a really important component of what students do and what colleges do generally, but it is very much more applied. So we're talking about specialized research centers and labs located across Canada, in some cases with some funding from the federal government through tech access centers, but in other cases, you know, applied research can very much be driven by a local employer who is looking for a sort of real solution to a problem that will help them bring their product to market. So lots of really interesting and exciting examples of how applied research can be put to use in practice. One, for example, I might like to might like to highlight is you might have a college in Northern Ontario working very closely with the lumber industry on how to sort of use the leftover wood scraps and turning that into a fertilizer that could then be used to enhance outputs in the agricultural industry. So applied research is very much looking for real world solutions to real world problems. Colleges and institutes also offer a very large, sort of wide variety of recognized credentials and flexible points of entry. So what is quite a unique element of the Canadian college and institute landscape is the fact that these institutions are offering certificate programs of 1 year in length, and in some cases full degree programs of 4 years in length, but always with a more very specific applied element. So in addition to that, many of our colleges and institutes offer what we call postgraduate programs or postgraduate certificates. And these certificates were actually specifically designed for students who have already graduated or obtained a post-secondary education credential. Perhaps they didn't have the opportunity to do any work integrated learning or co-ops and are looking for something a little bit more applied and practical to turn their knowledge into something that, into real world skills. So this is sort of a general overview of the Canadian post-secondary system. It looks a little bit complicated, and it's partly because it's a very flexible system. There are many different pathways and opportunities for students to move through it. But what I would just draw your attention to here is the fact that you have really 3 sort of options when students tend to graduate from high school. Some might go directly into an apprenticeship, which is really more of a fully hands-on applied experience. On the other hand, we have a university system in Canada, which is not unlike many other university systems around the world, in the United States, for example. And in between, you have the colleges and institutes, which is sort of a combination of the academic elements and the practical and applied elements. So a student, for example, can take a 2-year diploma at a college or institute and then transition directly into the labor market. They will have acquired the necessary skills and competencies to be employable in that specific field. There are thousands of articulation agreements between colleges and universities across Canada, allowing students to move between the two. A student might complete a 2-year diploma and then transfer to a university to complete the rest of their degree. And as I mentioned, in many cases, we're seeing students who are graduating from university, a 4-year degree, and then moving on to a college or institute as sort of a finishing school through a postgraduate certificate or diploma. In some ways, universities and colleges are becoming more alike. Many universities are offering co-op programs, as Chelsea mentioned, but they tend to be a bit more exclusive or optional in some cases, whereas the work integrated learning opportunities at the college are very much built into the overall experience. So in conclusion, Colleges and Institutes Canada really offer state-of-the-art facilities, strong connections to the labor market. This is a demand-driven education system with an emphasis on skills development and employability. So the programs that are offered at a college or institute in Canada are there to meet a specific labor market need. Of course, these labor market needs are conceived of, or sort of these programs are developed for a Canadian labor market, but Canada is a trading nation, very much connected to the rest of the world, and the skills and competencies you need to work in Canada are very much similar to those that you might need to work in similar industries in many other countries. There are a lot of academic and career pathways. As I mentioned, a very personal approach. Colleges and institutes tend to be smaller, smaller class sizes, offering hands-on learning and really interesting supports. And really, it is an excellent return on investment for students, for scholarship providers, for Canadian students as well. We're offering a quality education for a very affordable tuition, and again, with very strong labor market outcomes. So the return on investment is quite high. So I'll end there for now, and happy to further elaborate on any of this throughout the rest of the session.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm just going to bring on our additional speakers here as well. Bear with me for one moment. Okay, I think they're coming through. And I've also put a link into the chat as well for those of you who are with us to make sure that you check that link. That's where the recordings will be for all of our webinars and also the signups for the next 2 webinars to come. And those are coming on Wednesday and on Friday. So thank you so much, Andrew and Chelsea. Please allow me to introduce 2 new members to the virtual stage. We have Timea Tiboldi, the head of language programs at the Tempus, sorry, I'm tongue-tied, at Tempus Public Foundation in Hungary. And we also have Ronnie Mugoiri, the Assistant Director of Education with the Ministry of Education State Department for the University Education and Research in Kenya. So welcome so much. Welcome to everyone. It's been a long day. I am tongue-tied for sure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's dive in. We're talking about work experience. We just had a great presentation from Andrew and Chelsea. I'm curious to hear as well, especially from our scholarship organizations, how are you finding the demand for work integrated learning? This morning in some of our panel sessions, we talked about changing requirements when looking at institutions abroad with, let's say, maybe rankings being a little bit less important and the student experience being perhaps a bit more important. And certainly, as Andrew and Chelsea highlighted, work experience is a big part of the educational experience. How are you finding this in your countries, in Hungary and in Kenya? Is there more demand for work integrated learning, for example? Oops, I think we've got you on mute. Sorry about that. Let's see, make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm muted, right? Okay.
Great, okay.
So regarding Hungary, we can just say that our Ministry of Innovation and Technology tries to put more emphasis on work integrating learning. So we have more and more possibilities for young students and also youngsters to participate in this. And also university students are more into work integrating learning. So this is one of our major priorities regarding education and the change of education today in Hungary.
Great. Ronnie, I think you're on mute, but there you go. Great.
Yes, basically Kenya, we are a sending organization. But all the same, with the COVID-19, we have seen a lot of demand for jobs from the learners in the universities, and especially looking for jobs virtually, which has been very good to keep them busy.
And speaking of COVID, the elephant in the Zoom, as we say now, how is this impacting the work experience? All of us personally, of course, have felt this. Maybe Andrew and Chelsea, you can talk a little bit about the student experience working virtually. It's come up in our chat as well. So an attendee is also asking, how are institutions adapting to work integrated learning in the time of COVID?
Sure, I can certainly comment on that. This was obviously a very big preoccupation for our member institutions when the pandemic really broke in March. Of course, the shift to work from home had a big impact on work integrated learning components in many of the programs that our members offer. At the beginning, these were largely postponed. But beginning in June, in some cases, students were being welcomed back onto campus in a very safe way, according to many of the protocols, social distancing, etc., in order to complete those work integrated learning components, many of which are in fact sort of required in order for students to complete their programs or to move into a very specific or professional occupation. So getting that back up and running was very important. And what we're seeing now, certainly into the fall, is that institutions are offering really a mix of programming that really falls into 3 different categories. Where work integrated components are necessary, those students are being welcomed onto campus or in some cases with employers to complete those components. And this is typically the hybrid model, where you're seeing some programming, what can be offered online is offered online, and the work integrated learning components are being offered in person. Some programming has shifted entirely online, and we're seeing some institutions really utilizing online simulations and various other tools in order to make sure that students have some experience working on projects with others. And overall, I think it's quite interesting in the sense that COVID has sort of accelerated our shift to a more digital environment, and a lot of these skills, that we're all learning sort of on the fly, and that students will sort of grow up with to a larger extent, are going to be increasingly important at reducing barriers, increasing access, all those sorts of things. And of course, the online component, I think, will be quite interesting in Canada. We are a very large country, many remote communities, and this will allow us to really up our game and offer programming that will suit learners of all types in all locations. So that's sort of how I would characterize the current situation here.
Okay, thank you. You brought up a good point about access, and that is certainly on the minds of many of us this year, because even here, sometimes in the UK, we don't always have a strong enough Wi-Fi signal. Out in Hungary, out in Kenya, what can you tell us about access to decent internet connections, to decent equipment? There's also been a lot of reports about students not having access to a quiet study space as well. So for those who are going through that virtual experience, could you share with us some of your experiences, Timea, Ronnie?
Yes, of course. I think we are doing quite well in Hungary, and actually we have quite a lot of international students. Obviously, the number of international students has decreased due to the COVID situation, but we have like 1/3 of students coming to Hungary. And what is new in this situation is, and what our government introduced, is that although we have restrictions, just like in Canada, that you have to, consult our government's website, whether you can come into the country or not, but you don't have to be present physically to enroll into a university course. So you can study from the UK, from any other country, and you can still study at our university. So this is how we would like to attract more and more international students. This is one thing. The other is that we had a survey conducted in Hungary about international students who were really satisfied. Like 30,000 international students participated. It was last year before the COVID situation. And they were really satisfied with Hungary, all the services we provide. I think Hungary has the advantage of being a very safe country, in a sense that, international students can walk freely on the streets. So it's a peaceful place to come and visit. So we ranked quite high on accommodation and on all the other necessities you need and the facilities. So I think we are okay. We have Wi-Fi everywhere. You can complain sometimes that the Wi-Fi connection is not working, but I think you complain nearly all over the world. But in general, we have Wi-Fi everywhere in Hungary.
Okay, thank you. And Ronnie, give us the take on how things are going down there.
Okay, in Kenya, with the COVID-19, most of the students were required to do their studies virtually. And one advantage we have in Kenya is that with the mobile telephony, Wi-Fi is cheap, and most of the students, by the virtue of them having smartphones, they can easily follow up their studies from wherever they are in the country. And so they have been able to carry on their studies, either using their laptops, which they can tether from their phones and still carry on their studies, or using their smartphones or tablets. Again, we saw our local telephone companies, the mobile telephony companies, giving subsidized data bundles for the students so that they can learn during the COVID-19. So the COVID-19 really has been a blessing in disguise for the academic field, because we have seen a lot of philanthropy from the industry to help the education sector overall.
That's great. Very encouraging. Yeah. And we've also seen a lot of flexibility. We talked about this in the previous session, flexibility from governments or employers to accept online learning. Do you see that as a trend going forward, that there will be more acceptance of online experiences versus that face-to-face? We all value the face-to-face. We know that that's what students want, but we do have a temporary solution in place. And maybe Andrew and Chelsea can speak to that experience as well in terms of how the students are adapting to a virtual work experience in the meantime, or what that might mean going forward. I'll open it up to the panel, actually. Who wants to share some thoughts about that virtual experience? Will it last? How is it benefiting the students? How are they coping?
I can maybe start off here. I think it's important to note, at least in a Canadian context, that yes, there were a number of flexibilities that were introduced to allow students to, continue their studies online. There were a number of international students who were here in March that decided to go home, and many and some who have now started their programs from abroad and are studying with institutions here in Canada. But the access issues you mentioned earlier were very important, very top of mind for institutions here in Canada, and accessibility is, as I said, a very important principle. So it's very positive in the sense that we now have a process in Canada that will allow international students to return physically if they are studying at an institution that has been approved by their respective province or territory as having the necessary protocols in place to welcome them safely. So this would apply to students who are coming certainly for programs that involve a work integrated learning component. They have to be here, to a certain extent face-to-face, but this would also apply to students who are studying entirely online if they are enrolled at an eligible institution. So it does provide the opportunity to still be here, gain some community experience, sort of get a sense of what it's like in Canada and learn a lot of those soft skills through daily interactions. Continue your studies online, have a solid connection, work in the same time zone. So that is, I would say, a benefit of what the current situation is in Canada. And beyond that, in terms of the work experience online, as I said, I think these are going to be skills that are going to be increasingly important in the world of work. And colleges and institutions are always very forward-looking in the sense that as the sort of skills needs of the labor market evolve, colleges have to adapt quickly. And so digital literacy, I think, will become an increasingly important part of what students will be learning in the context of their programs.
Okay, thank you. Chelsea, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that.
I guess the only thing, and that was very, very well put, Andrew. And I think it's worth me mentioning just that because I only work in the UK market, sometimes it's hard to speak anything but broadly about these topics. And I do think, the question of what's going to happen next year, even in 3 months, is sort of the $1 million question, isn't it? But I think, and I'm just actually thinking about this in the context of, I see Michael RK has mentioned something in the chat here, just in terms of accessibility. And I think the idea, at least in Canada, is that we want to be able to provide students with in-person physical experiences, as Andrew had said. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Remote learning is still something that's figuring prominently into the context, and I think that's going to largely be the case in coming months anyway. Although I'm going to make that a very non-committal answer because I don't know what the case is going to be. But I guess one thing I want to say on that is what I anticipate as a trend going forward is a real increase in governments working together and collaborating and developing a greater partnership to ensure that some of these accessibility issues are met and kind of mitigated, I guess. But also that students can be supported in other ways. So, for example, one thing we've seen in Canada is that there's been a real increase in education technology development as a direct result of COVID-19. And some of this, this is specifically being utilized to help students who may have accessibility issues. Now, I don't know what that future will be like, and I don't know how that will necessarily apply to each individual country context, but I do think that what COVID-19 has allowed us is this real opportunity to engage in more international, more globalized, and more collaborative ways to try and solve some of those issues we haven't had to think about before.
Mm. And coming back, oh yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in connection with Chelsea's thoughts that the same applies to Hungary. So basically, all of a sudden, distant education was introduced in Hungary, and what we did from like Friday to Monday on that everybody stayed at home in the first part of this COVID situation in March 2020, and now the digital technology, everybody is more aware of digital technology. Teachers went on, training courses, students were better off this digital technology, but also it turned out that it's not good for the social gap, because students who stayed at home could not meet each other, so socializing became an issue here, and that's what our government tries to solve these days, how to tackle this problem, how to overcome this social distancing situation. So this is what I just wanted to add. The technology is there, so we are working on it. And we have a government website which provides teachers with useful material they can download. We have different applications available for teachers, different online services that they can use. Yet, I can see, and when you talk to parents and you talk to teachers, they would like to meet personally. So that's another question, how you can solve this situation.
Thank you. And certainly the distance factor that we're all dealing with does build a different skill set for all of us.
Yes.
We started kind of referring to soft skills and digital skills, which now, like it or not, we're all getting quite used to. Ronnie and Timea, I was also curious if you could give us a bit of an outlook for the future of scholarships from your country. Ronnie, you mentioned that there was more philanthropy, more support for scholarships coming out of Kenya. Maybe you could expand on that. We're also keen, to know how is the outlook? Will there be funding cuts? Obviously, we're facing economic disappointment, let's call it, in the near future. We don't know how long that's going to last for. So what does that mean for scholarship funding going forward?
For scholarship funding, we may not actually see an actual cut. What I see going forward is targeted funding in areas that are going to improve on the resilience of the communities, in the area of applied research, which is development oriented, or in the area of innovation, which is going to spur employment. In the case of Kenya, during the COVID-19, it has been a blessing, these days, because we have seen a lot of upgrading of the digital skills, first by the academia, the workers in the universities and the institutions, and even the students, regardless of which course you are taking, you had to come up and really be digital so that you can fit in. So going forward, we are going to see that this will not be let go, but it will be adopted. And although we may go back to face-to-face, this will become acceptable in the society going forward.
Great, positive aspects coming through there. I love it. Timea, any thoughts on Hungary and funding going forward?
Okay, so as you know, we are part of the European Union, so we are quite lucky in the sense that we have a lot of international students, Erasmus students, and also our government promotes language learning. So last year we had a program which had to be suspended because of the COVID-19. It was the language training of students, secondary school students who study in grade 9 and 11. The government wanted to provide them with a 2-week-long special language learning program regarding English, German, and French. We'll see whether we can continue or not. So it's like $1 million question, just like you mentioned. So we have no idea. We would love to work on this. But we can also see that there are more and more students who can apply for different international scholarships. It's mostly within the EU, but they also have possibility like the Campus Mundi and like different programs. So I think there's a tendency, there's a wish, and there's a need also. But because of this pandemic, I have no idea what's going to happen, honestly.
Yeah, it is difficult, of course, for all of us to predict. Moving parts, as we want to call it. I'm curious as well. We've been talking today about how to evaluate institutions, and Ronnie, you touched upon research as well. Do you see a change in terms of what scholarship organizations are looking for in their institutional partners? Is there, let's say, more of a focus towards research-based institutions and opportunities, or is it more towards practical work experience opportunities? Is it a bit of both? Any thoughts?
In my case, I think we are more interested in a blend of both the practical working skills in the industry, as well as research knowledge or the ability to carry out research. That will be very pivotal for scholarship organizations to fund students and institutions.
Okay, thank you. And Timea, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's both. So regarding work integrated learning, it's also important, but research-based is, if you go to a higher institution, like you go to university where you have a special field of interest and it's more like academic interest. But most of the secondary school students who are looking for scholarship, they are more into work integrated learning possibilities. So I would say both are important in case of Hungary.
Okay. Great. And I also had a question about priority areas. Jonah had mentioned STEM degrees always, being very popular, although he had also highlighted tourism and hospitality and arts. And Chelsea, you also mentioned as an example, an art student getting experience. How do you see, Timea, Ronnie, how do you see the demand changing for different priority areas, different degree programs? What's becoming more and more important for you as a scholarship organization?
For us, actually, partnership is extremely important. So we're always looking for partners, like international partners with whom our, applicants can pair up with, and they can look for different exchange students, and they can exchange programs, and they can manage it. So now you can have an exchange program which needs like a physical presence, but sometimes it can also be managed via the internet. So like if they come up with project work or something like this. So we are looking for partnership programs. That's important. And universities with whom they can apply for these programs. We also deal with staff mobility, teacher mobility. So it's not only student mobility, which is important, but teacher mobility. Honestly, we have to admit that because of the COVID situation, we have less and less teacher mobility. So what we experience in Hungary is that students are looking for long-term mobility possibilities, and the short-term where you had like teacher exchanges, which lasted for like 2 weeks, they don't apply for this because you have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks when you go and then when you come back. So it's more like long-term mobility that we are looking for at the moment, and it's more practical mobility, like partnership programs.
Great. Ronnie, any thoughts on that?
In the case of Kenya, we are emphasizing STEM. But even then, as much as we are emphasizing STEM, we also want to develop the soft skills of the learners. And so, even though we are emphasizing in STEM, we would like to have institutions which have a program that develops the soft skills of the learners so that they can fit in the industry. At the same time, we also want to see an industrial research component or attachment where the learners can actually get the feel of the actual job environment in the course of their training. But all the same, in the area of research, although we are emphasizing in the STEM, we also want to see interdisciplinary and joint research being carried out by professionals or specialists in different subject areas, so that it can be applicable in the Kenyan context for development purposes.
Excellent, great. I have another question. It might be a bit controversial, but I'll put it out there and take a chance. Chelsea had mentioned a great statistic about the economic strength of Canada. We've also seen certain countries that have handled COVID better than other countries. Does the economic strength of a country going forward, does the way that a country has handled COVID-19, does this influence where you as a funding organization might concentrate going forward, developing partnerships? Do you think you might, let's say, look for more partnerships in countries that are a bit more economically stable going forward? Would you be looking more towards Asia that has handled COVID in a much different fashion? Has that had any impact or effect on you as a sending organization or a funding organization?
This is a difficult question. We haven't considered this yet. Well, I think today what you have to look out for is the possibility of partnerships. So I would say that it's not how they handled COVID economically, but basically whether a country is safe or not for students to travel, because this is the responsibility of the sending organization to offer a country. So I would say that health issues are more important here than economic issues, although I know that they sometimes come together. So I would say that health issues are the priority things to consider.
Okay, great. So I think we're coming to a close. Any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share in terms of, let's say, new partnerships or new initiatives that have been launched recently or that are perhaps on the horizon? I'll give you a moment to just think of any final thoughts you'd like to share with our attendees today.
Maybe I'll just highlight quickly, you know, in 2019, the Government of Canada launched a new international education strategy. And a core component of that strategy was to really develop more opportunities for Canadian students to go abroad, develop the kinds of soft skills, competencies, you know, international work integrated learning opportunities that we've discussed a little bit today, really recognizing that you know, we're in a situation here in Canada where we attract many people from all around the world who bring a lot of strengths and perspectives to our labor market. And while you can learn a lot here in Canada from different cultures and perspectives just based on the diversity that we have around us, I think there's increasingly the importance of, you know, having some of that experience abroad is really coming to the forefront. Obviously, you know, so Colleges and Institutes Canada is a delivery partner on this program with our sister organization, Universities Canada. Obviously, it has been somewhat disrupted by COVID-19, but we are, you know, moving forward and really looking at innovative ways for students to still get some of these, some of the same objectives in terms of the soft skills and competencies that you might get from these experiences abroad. So Government of Canada is still very much committed to this this area, and I think it sort of bodes well and sort of signals the overall intention of our country in making sure that those skills are prioritized.
Yeah, I'd really like to echo Andrew on that. You know, I think in some ways scholarships and bursaries can really be the great equalizer for students in terms of allowing access perhaps to students who may not have otherwise been able to have that international experience or gain that you know, work integrated experience. And you know, while our government is very committed to sending students abroad, it's also very committed to supporting the international students, obviously, that come to Canada and ensuring that those experiences are good. Now, we don't have the kind of same private funding as institutions in the USA. And so we really do benefit from those scholarship opportunities because it means that we're getting such a plethora of students, students with many different perspectives from many walks of life who are able to contribute to our societies and learn from them and potentially bring those skills back to their own countries. So I think in that context, in the context of the kind of conversational work integrated learning, it's, you know, it's just, I guess it's very, very important to us to kind of keep ensuring that we're bringing students in from all over the world, regardless of their backgrounds and the opportunities they may or may not have had, and allowing them to have those opportunities to gain international work experience.
Okay, and I would also like to recommend Hungary. So I think it's a very, very nice country to come. And, you know, the research I mentioned, it was conducted among like 30,000 students from 123 countries, and they all like this place to study. So we are also looking for incoming students and outgoing students. So we are dealing with both type of students. So please check out Hungary if you are considering partnership programs in the future.
As a closing remark, one thing that COVID has done is that it has made us very human. And going forward, I see a lot of partnership between nations of the world and academic institutions, both north to south and also south to south. So at this point, I'm inviting you to Kenya for your international experience, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're all very eager to get back out there in the real face-to-face as opposed to the virtual face-to-face. But I think we've been able to come together today and to share a lot of great insights. So thank you so much, Chelsea and Andrew, to that interesting presentation on the wealth of opportunities that await international students in Canada and also in Hungary and also in many institutions around the world. Timea and Ronnie, thank you also for sharing your insights and your experiences with us today. And thank you to our attendees for taking the time and attention with us. We've got also 2 more panels that are coming. So on Wednesday and Friday, we have guest speakers coming through from Kosovo, from Saudi Arabia, from Australia, New Zealand, Colombia, the Americas, South Africa. We're really covering all corners of the globe here with the summit and the symposium. So I do encourage you to join us at 9 a.m. UK time on Wednesday, and to finish off your week on a high on Friday at 3 p.m. UK time. There's that link again in the chat for you. And thank you once again to everyone for taking the time today, and have a fantastic week ahead full of meetings and great partnerships that await. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.